And Mauritanian iron miner SNIM, which is about 76.8% in the pocket of the government, has reported a full year profit, $579 million US dollars, turnover up nearly 40%, $1.2 billion for full year 2020. This is the biggest industrial company in Mauritania, northwest of the African continent. Keep that in mind. It's in your news box. But we've got a bigger news for you to chew on, so listen very carefully. The International Monetary Fund, or the IMF, has called on countries around the world to agree on global rules for corporate income taxation in order to avoid an eventual scenario where conflicts between countries make all of them worse off. What the IMF is proposing is similar to the proposal by the Biden administration, looking to ensure that highly profitable multinational companies pay sufficient tax in the places or countries where they do business, including low-income countries such as Nigeria. Now let's get some insights into this developing story as we bring on the show Taiwo Oyedele, Fiscal Policy Partner and Africa Tax Leader at PwC Nigeria. Thank you and good evening for coming through on the show.
Thank you for having me, Boston.
This is a big international story with ramifications for sub-Saharan Africa, in particular developing economies such as Nigeria. But let's get a bigger picture. What do you make of this warning by the IMF chief, Kristalina Georgieva, of a possible global trade war if we don't have a global tax deal? Well, what is this tax deal all about, Taiwo?
Yeah, I think the IMF is drawing attention to a very important and global problem, which I would say that the whole world has agreed that indeed there is a problem. What the world has not agreed on is what the solutions should be. So essentially, I think the way to explain it is that there's what we call base erosion and profit shifting. And this essentially has to do with multinational companies because they operate in more than one country, and that's why they are called multinationals. So what happens is you can play on the international tax rules such that you look for a country where the tax rates are very low or where there's no tax rate at all, 0% tax rate, and you can move intellectual property and a few items into those locations. Even though you don't have a lot of commercial activities in that place, you may be earning a lot of revenue and profit in such locations. What then happens is the countries where the activities are being conducted are being deprived of their rightful revenue. I have to also say that this is not always illegal. In fact, many of the situations where we have base erosion and profit shifting are indeed in line with the laws. So which is why the IMF is drawing the attention to it to say, if we don't address this as a global problem, we're going to have what we call the race to the bottom. Because what it means is, if I reduce my corporate income tax rate, I would attract more companies, more multinationals into my territory, even if they are not doing any activity here in my country. So if every country is doing that, and they keep reducing their tax rate, we'll get to a point where many countries will be bankrupt because they no longer can raise tax revenue to fund their economies. So the solution is not a solution that one country can find because it's a global problem and it requires global consensus.
Well, is this similar, Taiwo, may I cut in respectfully, is this similar to what the Biden administration is talking about, that the IMF is also talking about and warning about?
Yes. So for a long time, the world has been trying to find the solution, but like I said, there was no agreement. And one of the major countries that refused to agree was actually the United States. With Donald Trump at the time not ready to listen to the rest of the world, it created a lot of uncertainties. So what we call the inclusive framework was introduced in 2016. And the idea was that, can we get the multinational companies to pay a global minimum tax? In other words, let's say a multinational is doing a lot of business in Nigeria, but the Nigerian government has decided to say your tax rate will be 10%, for example. So what that means is The US should say if it's a US company anyway, you've paid only 10% in Nigeria, and you're supposed to pay a minimum of, say, 21%, which is what Joe Biden has said now. I will collect the balance from you, so that for that company, there will be no longer the incentive for them to come to Nigeria and negotiate very hard, influence the government to get a lower rate, because they know that whatever benefit is coming to them from those concessions, they will lose it to the country of their home country. So that's what Joe Biden is now saying, to say, well, we are ready, we are America, we are ready to work with the rest of the world to try and come up with a global minimum tax rate, such that if a multinational refuses to pay tax where they're doing business, we'll still collect the tax anyway. So with that, the incentive for them to try and minimize their taxes where they do businesses will be significantly reduced.
So in a manner of speaking, this is good news for developing and frontier markets like in sub-Saharan Africa, is it, where we've seen very weak tax jurisdictions?
Yeah, I think in a way, yes. Developing countries such as Nigeria and many countries in Africa depend on corporate income tax significantly in funding their budget and their economies. So the more you have this base erosion and profit shifting, the less money developing countries will be able to collect. In addition to that, one major problem with developing countries is they do not have sufficient capacity. And many of them don't put their best foot forward when they are negotiating agreements with multinationals. So what you then see is that in many cases, they get the lower end of the bargain. So they lose a lot of money. So if the whole world can agree on these initiatives, then developing countries will benefit, because part of the initiative includes developing tools and capacity that can help even the developing countries to understand and deal with these situations of tax avoidance, aggressive avoidance, base erosion, profit shifting, such that at the end of the day, every country gets a fair share of the revenue that they truly deserve.
Important question. How will the multinationals and the global companies respond to this global corporate tax?
Yeah, I think the multinationals don't have a lot of say in all of this, unfortunately. I think the world recognizes that the role of multinationals in the development of the global economy is significant. We do not want to get to a point where, on one hand, we don't want multinationals to avoid paying taxes or paying a very low rate when even local companies are paying higher rates. On the other hand, you don't want every country imposing different rates of taxes such that multinationals will no longer want to invest. So having said that, how are they responding to all of this? I think they're just trying to put their own voices across to say, well, you need to understand our business models, our circumstances, but they're not objecting aggressively, because the data is there to show that you have some of the top global multinationals with billions of dollars worth of profit in countries where they have no activities whatsoever. So I think it's so obvious that the multinationals cannot completely disagree with what is being proposed. And I think that it will not be a perfect solution, no matter how you tweak it. But then it's good to start as a progress from where we are now, and then get things to improve as we go along.
Okay, Taiwo Oyedele, we've got a few more grounds to cover on this after the break. For example, now we've got the AfCFTA. So how does that impact such a very mega deal between Africa and the rest of the world and within Africa itself? Let's come back to you after this. You're watching Arise Exchange. Everyone stand by. Yes, we are fleshing up the news around the proposal for a new global corporate income taxation. A little bit further, my guest, Taiwo Oyedele, Fiscal Policy Partner and Tax Leader at PwC Nigeria. Thank you very much, Taiwo. Let's talk a little bit about this. You've laid the foundation, but do you think the new global income taxation being proposed by the United States somewhat and the IMF will be a threat to or benefit the new intra-Africa trade deal or the AFCFTA?
The AFCFTA, it's fundamentally about allowing free trade to remove both tariff and non-tariff barrier to trade in goods, trade in services, as well as investment and intellectual property. So what would happen, which is, at some point there was some hesitations around the treaty, and this was essentially because some countries were concerned that other countries within Africa will take advantage of them. And some of these things are also facilitated by base erosion and profit shifting. So let me give you, like a practical example. Benin Republic has just about 11, 12 million people, but it's next to Nigeria with over 200 million population. So if Benin Republic decides to reduce their corporate income tax rate to, let's say, 10%, what you're going to find is many companies that are doing business in Nigeria will move their headquarters to Benin Republic. They'll produce there, they'll have their top people there, but the market where they're selling to is still in Nigeria, because under the AFCA, they can easily move their goods and services to Nigeria. So what's going to happen is the taxes that Nigeria was meant to collect would have been shifted to Benin Republic. Now, if another country says, well, I can beat Benin Republic to it. Benin is doing 10%, let me do 5%. You cannot continue with that. That's why the IMF is saying this can lead to a trade war, or what we call harmful, competition. So for AFCA, if you have this agreement to have something like sort of, global minimum, tax rate. By the way, this is not the only initiative under the framework. It's just one that is receiving a lot of attention at the time. If you have that minimum, it will discourage countries from, reducing their tax rate below that threshold, and also for multinationals to be jumping around if they really don't have activities in certain jurisdictions, some of which we call, tax haven. So I think overall this would be good for AFCA in terms of helping us to promote fair trade as part of the regional integration to promote economic prosperity for Africans.
Yes, a quick one. There are Nigerian banks doing business in a number of other African frontiers or countries. Dangote Cement, for example, in a number of African countries with a boot on the ground. Will companies such as this be considered as multinationals, and will the new global corporate income taxation applies to them?
Yeah, once you have any activity in another country, once you operate in more than one country, you're already a multinational, or maybe at least more than two. So what's going to happen is the likes of, our UBA, our Dangote group will be affected. But there's also a threshold that is being proposed globally. That threshold is somewhere around $1 billion revenue. So it is not every, company that is involved in multinational activities that will be impacted, because it may be a small company, particularly in this day of technology. You may find a small company with maybe one or two employees on their laptop. They have customers in many countries and they have agents, so you don't want to overburden those small companies and businesses with the stress and the burden of this initiative. So, but of course, for very large companies with significant turnover, they will be impacted. But it does not mean that they'll have to pay more taxes, because, by the way, many of the countries in Africa have very high tax rates. So, introducing a minimum tax, the US is proposing 21%. So, in Nigeria, our tax rate is 30%. Benin Republic, Ghana, South Africa, most of these countries, Kenya, have between 25 and 30%. So it really would not affect multinationals that are headquartered in Nigeria.
Okay, so for Nigeria, for example, will it help the government collect more taxes from the multinationals, in particular in the oil and gas hydrocarbon industry, or perhaps telecommunications?
Yeah, I think it depends on where we land eventually. So many years back, Nigeria was over generous with our tax incentives and tax regime. such that in the upstream oil sector, if you bought an asset, imagine buying an asset, government technically pays you the money back because they call it investment tax credit. You recover the entire amount used in buying the asset from your taxes due to the government. So these reforms have been done now, and the incentives are no longer as generous. But if these rules are implemented overall, Nigeria should be able to collect more taxes because many of the multinationals would then be discouraged from taking excessive incentives in Nigeria because they know whatever they save in Nigeria, they will lose it to other countries where they are headquartered or residents. So, but I think beyond relying on this framework for us to raise revenue, Nigeria just need to try and look inwards. Actually, I think we're even losing more in terms of tax revenue to companies operating within Nigeria, not just multinationals. In fact, overall, multinationals, based on statistics in Nigeria, are more compliant relatively than other companies operating in the country.
We thank you so much for your time, insight and perspectives on this tonight. Taiwo Oyedele, partner and Africa tax leader at PwC Nigeria. Thank you so much. Enjoy your weekend.
Thank you for having me.